Hello world, Joshi Master here. We're going to get into a little bit of some mind-body science, going on to what some of the ancients considered to be animus anima, rational mind, and also the feminine and masculine aspects. So here we're going to get a little bit into Aristotle's theory of psychology, which is the soul, body, form, and matter. So every human being has a particular form of mind, ego, and development. And as we start to grow and as we start to develop our own characteristics and our own personal perceptions, we first have to start off with the most basic, which is imitation, neuroplasticity. This is where the soul comes into play. See, actually, we do have a soul. We have something that goes beyond just our basic conscious mind. And this is where the soul goes into play. Now, what's interesting is that the soul actually drives the body. So what happens is that we all have an internal mechanism. We all have an internal development that allows us to be able to get into our personal goals, deeds, and aspirations. But for whatever reason, we seem to get that taken out of us as we start to grow, as we start to become more educated. We start to get categorized into a specific way of development. We start to believe, and we're taught that our grades and everything else is an actual reflection of us, which is absolute bullshit. So we are capable of being able to transcend those things if we start getting into personal development. However, that starts to take into a form of matter. So that matter is our actual conscious form of what we start to create and start to make a shape of who we are. So Aristotle had a pretty good firm foundation on that. Now we're going to kind of jump into a little bit over here into Maslow's hierarchy. So here we've got the physiological, basic responses to nuances of physical stress, brought about because of external circumstances and internal circumstances. Those are two completely different things. And our body's physiological response to how those outcomes reflect our natural correspondence on a physical level. So what happens is, i.e. mortgage payment really isn't life or death, but our brain is hardwired to react according to that pressure and that stress. So that mechanism creates stress on the human body, which affects the person psychologically as well. So depending upon whether or not our needs are being met in that regard, that stress starts to create and starts to go into safety needs. Our safety needs, which is basic food, water, shelter, sex, such things, making sure that those things are being met. And here in the West, we generally really don't have any issues in that regard because we live in a pretty decent society where those things are provided with endless possibilities. However, that seems to be being castrated nowadays in current generation with socialism and egalitarianism, which has been massive spread, and I don't know why, but it's really caught on to our current generation. Now we've got to go into belonging needs. Now everybody needs to have a group of people that they're able to socialize with, they're able to talk to, they're able to go to. And unfortunately that is becoming more and more depraved and starting to become more isolative in people's behaviors. Human beings don't seem to socialize anymore because of our connection with our phones. So it's a good idea to turn that bad boy off and to sit down and actually talk with someone, one of your friends, one of your colleagues, someone that you can associate with, because that'll help you grow mentally and socially as well. Now we're going to get into esteem needs. We're kind of making this really quick here. Esteem needs. So our internal clock, our internal needs of wanting to feel validated by peers and other people around us. That's something that we generally conceptualize on a continuous and day-to-day basis. And this actually, which is interesting, as our esteem needs goes into our cognitive needs. Our needs of being able to know that we understand and that what we're thinking of is being validated. And that we're able to understand that our intelligence and that our hopes and worries and fears are being understood. That's important. And we get into aesthetic needs, such as how we look, how we feel, in the regards of how we look. Body definition, and how we view ourselves, very important. And once we get past all these basic aspects, we start getting into self-actualization, which is where we start going beyond the basic normal development of internal machinations, dogmatic principles, and we start to realize that we can overcome these things if we use focused development, self-development. We're no longer caught between these psychological paradigms between belonging and wanting and having to think about what other people think about us. These are actual very biological as well. This is something that seems to be a missing aspect in our thought process nowadays. Maslow had it pretty good in that regard. Now we're going to bounce on over here to Carl Jung. I'm going into the conscious, collective conscious, and personal conscious, persona, ego, self, and shadow self. So we all have a persona. We all have what our personal self is. And the ego which is self-esteem, which is how we view ourselves and how we go about our daily lives and how we view things. And then there is the self, which is the portion of our conscious mind that we're able to hold within ourselves. And an old adage that a person has 3 hearts is actually pretty interesting in how that correlates with this. The person has a heart that they show to the world, that they have for their family, and one that they have for themselves. And this actually directly correlates in this regard. And, our ego is the portion of our consciousness and our self-esteem of how we look at ourselves on a day-to-day basis, which can fluctuate between any of these psychological paradigms at any given moment. And then finally, we also have the shadow self, which is the one that idolizes the dark, that sexual behavior, predatory aspects, dark aspects, which are necessarily, they're not necessarily in the dichotomy of breaking it down into good and bad and evil, but they're the portions of ourselves that we generally tend to shy away from. Our animalistic tendencies of needing to feel primal and feel strong and powerful, especially for men. That's just kind of rational for what we do. And the rational mind, which is how we're able to conceive and think about things in an actual process. But everyone's viewpoint, everyone's perception is different in how they go about thinking. But all these basically go into one complete circle or cycle, regardless if it's a circle, a pyramid, or a square. It doesn't really matter. It transcends the psychology basis of how we view life. And so what happens is that at the base level, our physiological responses to our outward environment reflect our stress levels. And a lot of managers, a lot of commercials are aimed towards these basic aspects, and that's how they control us. That's how you're controlled, is that they go into the physiological, which bypasses about 5 to 6 steps. So basically, when you're getting viewed with a commercial, it goes into your autonomic nervous system, actually goes into your optical relays in your eyes. It then starts to affect your safety needs, your belonging needs, your esteem needs, and your cognitive needs. So it bypasses a lot of these particular filters in the mind and goes directly into our aesthetic needs. So what's interesting is that commercials are geared towards bypassing all of these primary aspects of our psychological barriers and mental barriers that are meant to protect us from negative thoughts, negative attrition from other people. But however, that seems to have been bypassed, especially with social media. So what happens is that commercial goes directly to your physiological response, It then goes into your esteem response about how you feel about yourself, relating with another human being. And then it gets into your cognitive needs. Do you cognitively think that it's necessary for you to have to go with a social group or a social belonging to other people because you're angry about something? So it plays off of your emotional relay. It plays off of your cognitive and esteem needs. So then we start going into the personal unconscious, which is how you personally and unconsciously react to the outside world and interior world. And our unconscious minds actually have an internal intuition. This intuition does actually know better than we do on a lot of different things. What we eat, how we feel. You unconsciously know what is bad and what is good. However, those things have to be brought to the forefront to the conscious mind in order for it to affect the personal ego and the self. However, we have a tendency to over-exaggerate things and make things more complicated than they need to be, and they're not. Your consciousness, your personal consciousness, when you're awake, when you're alive, when you're able to cognitively think about things, is referred to as the sympathetic response. Sympathetic means is that your body's natural response that you can actually physically control. Such as stress levels and things like that, we actually can cognitively control those based on our emotional relay, based off of our ego. So with all this, basically all this is getting into is that we have the ability to go from physiological safety needs, belonging needs, esteem needs, cognitive needs, and aesthetic needs to self-actualization in a very short period of time. And eventually we can get here. This is probably the most important part. Transcendence. Being able to transcend all of these basic blockages and barriers that we've set up to prevail to what we're taught in societal needs. Now, we all need to have people that we can correlate with. Human beings have been tribal creatures since our beginning. And we need to be able to relate and correlate with other people so that way we're healthy mentally. But you also have to remember who you surround yourself with also affects who you become. This affects your soul, your body, and your personal form. It even affects your physiological matter. It's directly correlated with your body, internally and externally. So as we get a little bit into some of these aspects, breaking them down into their correlations, we can actually see that how you feel directly affects your body, your form, your matter, and your shape. So your physiological response is actually based off of first on your thought process. Yes, that's right. The first thing that goes into the basic aspect of our cognitive capability starts with our body's thought, our soul, the very aspect of our lives. And then it correlates into the body. You start creating psychosomatic disorders based upon what other people feel. Anywho, hopefully this gives you a little bit better premise. We're able to focus a bit more on some other things and give you a little bit of enlightenment. Anyways, Joshin Mastery out. Hope you enjoyed Psychology Breakdown 101. Rock on.